Have you ever wondered why the earliest humans, millions of years before written beliefs or organized rituals, already behaved as if something invisible was watching them? This question is uncomfortable because it forces us to admit that spirituality did not begin with temples, prophets, or sacred books. It began long before memory, long before the concept of religion even existed. And if you look closely at the traces left behind by our ancient ancestors, you will notice a pattern so persistent, so deeply rooted in human evolution, that it becomes impossible to ignore. Imagine a world where survival depended on instinct, silence, and the ability to sense threats before they appeared. In that world, early humans also sensed something else, something they could not touch or see, a presence that followed them through caves, open plains, and long nights of fear, a presence they could not explain, but also could not deny. This mysterious awareness shaped their behaviors, influenced their decisions, and eventually became the foundation of what we now call faith. Long before symbols existed, long before myths were created, that silent force was already sculpting the human mind. As you follow this idea, notice how it challenges everything we think we know about the origins of spirituality. What if the first spark of faith was not an invention, but a reaction, a response to something real in their perception of the world? What if that ancient sense of the unseen is still alive in us today, influencing the way we interpret meaning, purpose, and the unknown? You might recognize echoes of this instinct in moments when you feel watched, guided, or strangely connected to something beyond logic. And this connection, fragile but powerful, is one of the deepest threads running through the human story. You already know this topic touches something profound. If you have ever felt this subtle presence or questioned why humans were drawn to the invisible long before religion existed, share your thoughts in the comments. Understanding this content matters because it reveals how much of our internal world was shaped before history even began. And while you are here, make sure to like the video and check if you are already subscribed so you do not miss the next steps of this journey. Let this curiosity stay alive as we move to the next part, where the roots of this ancient perception begin to take clearer shape. When we look deeper into the earliest stages of human evolution, long before Homo sapiens appeared, the signs of an emerging spiritual sensitivity become even more striking. These ancient hominids lived in a reality dominated by danger, scarcity, and uncertainty, yet they behaved as if the world contained layers beyond the physical. Their reactions were not random. They showed patterns of awareness that exceeded simple survival instincts. Something in their environment triggered a sense that the visible world was only part of the story. Consider the way early hominids responded to darkness, storms, or the sudden stillness of the landscape. They did not merely hide or run, they paused, they observed. Their bodies reacted to stimuli that had no immediate threat or explanation. This heightened perception, almost like a primitive intuition, suggests that they experienced the world as filled with forces that demanded respect. Even without language complex enough to articulate it, they recognized moments that felt charged with meaning, moments when silence felt inhabited, moments when the wind, the shadows, or the movement of animals seemed to communicate something beyond coincidence. Archaeological evidence also reveals early behaviors that imply a recognition of the unseen. The arrangement of objects, the deliberate placement of stones or bones, and the selective preservation of certain spaces all point to a mind capable of symbolic thought long before religion took form. These gestures may appear simple to us today, but for species with limited cognitive abilities, they required an internal perception that extended beyond the material. They acted as if acknowledging invisible forces helped them navigate the unpredictability of their world. This early sensitivity is important because it marks the beginning of a profound psychological shift. It shows that spirituality did not arise abruptly. It grew slowly, as different species of hominids developed the neural capacity to interpret reality in more complex ways. They began noticing patterns where animals saw none. They sensed meanings where predators sensed only movement. They reacted not only to what they could see, but also to what they felt. This subtle distinction is the birthplace of spiritual awareness. And as this internal landscape expanded, so did their ability to connect experiences, memories, and fears into something more abstract than mere instinct. They were starting to recognize that existence might hold layers beyond survival. This is the moment when spirituality begins to detach itself from the physical world and anchor itself in perception. This shift, gradual but powerful, created a bridge between instinct and interpretation, between reaction and understanding, between the immediate and the invisible, setting the stage for everything that would come next as human consciousness continued to evolve. As early hominids continued to interpret the world through this expanding inner lens, the emotional forces shaping their perception became even more essential. Fear, awe, and uncertainty were not just reactions to danger. They were gateways that opened their awareness to the possibility of invisible forces. Every intense emotion created a psychological imprint strong enough to alter how they processed reality. When lightning split the sky or a predator's roar echoed through the night, the experience did not end when the danger passed. Something remained inside them, a lingering impression that the world was animated by powers beyond their understanding. This lingering emotional residue is what transformed simple instinct into the earliest form of meaning-making. When they survived a storm, they did not interpret it as random. They perceived it as a sign. When a hunt succeeded after days of failure, the relief carried an almost sacred weight. Their minds linked outcomes to invisible causes, creating a psychological bridge that allowed them to sense intention where none was visible. This emerging ability to project significance into events became the seed of spiritual interpretation. It meant they were no longer just responding to the environment, they were dialoguing with it. Awe played an equally crucial role. The vastness of the night sky, the rhythm of seasons, or the patterns in nature were not processed as neutral features of existence. For early humans, these experiences produced a mix of fascination and confusion, triggering internal responses that hinted at something greater. The immensity of the world around them imposed a cognitive humility that made them feel both threatened and connected. They began to search for explanations not because they sought control, but because the emotional weight of the unknown demanded interpretation. This emotional tension shaped the earliest spiritual constructs. Over time, these feelings allowed them to see the natural world as layered with intention. The crack of a falling tree could signify the arrival of a force. Sudden silence could imply presence. A shift in wind could carry meaning. These interpretations were not logical by modern standards, but they were deeply coherent within the framework of early human psychology. The mind was learning to combine sensory input and emotional memory, transforming uncertainty into narrative. Instead of experiencing fear as a momentary reaction, they transformed it into a story, a pattern, an explanation that made the world feel less chaotic. This is how perception slowly began to merge with imagination. Fear taught them to respect the unknown. Awe taught them to contemplate it. Together, these emotions created the mental environment necessary for spirituality to take root. The unseen was no longer dismissed. It was acknowledged, felt, and eventually integrated into their understanding of existence. As their emotional world grew richer, so did their interpretation of reality, setting the stage for the emergence of symbolic rituals and the first attempts to communicate with what could not be seen, but was undeniably sensed. As this emotional sensitivity deepened, early humans began to externalize their perceptions through actions that, although primitive, resembled the beginnings of ritual behavior. These were not yet religious ceremonies, nor structured belief systems. They were instinctive gestures born from the desire to interact with forces they felt but could not see. When a strange sound echoed in the night, or when a member of the group died unexpectedly, early humans responded with movements, patterns, and behaviors that reached beyond mere survival. These actions reveal an inner world struggling to make sense of the invisible, grasping for connection with something greater than themselves. Some of the earliest symbolic behaviors discovered in prehistoric sites showed deliberate organization: carefully placed stones, bones arranged in repeating patterns, or pigments applied to meaningful objects. These gestures required intention, focus, and a mental framework capable of recognizing significance. Even if they had no vocabulary to describe it, they were acknowledging that certain moments carried a weight that demanded expression. These instinctive acts may have been their way of interacting with a presence they could not fully comprehend, but whose influence they felt deeply. The desire to communicate, honor, or appease something unseen became an essential part of their emerging spiritual behavior. Over time, these small gestures evolved into more structured practices. Simple offering-like behaviors emerged, leaving collected stones near specific locations, covering bodies with sediments, or gathering around natural formations that seemed to carry symbolic power. These acts were not performed for practical benefit. They were performed because they resonated with the emotional and perceptual shifts happening within their minds. At some level, they believed these behaviors mattered, even if they could not explain why. This belief marked the transition from instinctive reaction to intentional ritual, and with each generation, these actions gained more emotional and symbolic depth. These early rituals also contributed to group cohesion. Shared gestures reinforced a collective interpretation of the world, helping individuals navigate fear, uncertainty, and loss. When the group gathered around a place they considered meaningful, each member felt connected not only to one another, but also to the unseen force they believed was present. This shared emotional experience strengthened their unity and allowed spiritual perception to become a communal reality instead of a solitary instinct. The ritual became a psychological anchor, shaping their collective identity and preparing them for the more complex spiritual practices that would emerge later in human evolution. As these behaviors continued to evolve, they revealed a growing capacity to project intention onto the world and assign meaning to actions that went beyond physical needs. Each ritualistic gesture, no matter how simple, reflected a mind increasingly aware of layers of existence beyond the tangible. This instinctive communication with the unseen became one of the earliest expressions of spirituality, a bridge between their internal perceptions and the external forces they believed influenced their lives. These subtle actions, performed in moments of fear, gratitude, or uncertainty, reveal not only how they saw the world, but how they felt it. If this perspective made you think about how these ancient gestures shaped everything that came after, share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what part of this early ritual behavior resonated with you. As these early ritualistic gestures took form, the environment itself became one of the most powerful forces shaping spiritual perception among ancient humans. Long before structured belief systems existed, the natural world dictated every aspect of survival, forcing early hominids to develop a heightened sensitivity to patterns that modern humans often overlook. Violent storms, sudden droughts, shifts in climate, or the appearance of predators were not just external events. They were psychological shocks that carved deep impressions into the human mind. These experiences shaped how early humans interpreted the world and reinforced the sense that unseen forces were constantly influencing their existence. The harshness of their environment produced a constant awareness of vulnerability. A night without fire meant exposure to predators. A failed hunt could mean starvation. A sudden change in temperature could shift an entire migration path. These conditions compelled early humans to search for meaning in natural events, because understanding their environment was essential to survival. As a result, they began associating environmental patterns with hidden intentions. The rumble of thunder was not merely sound, it was a message. The return of certain animals at specific times of the year felt like a sign. The rising wind during moments of emotional intensity seemed purposeful. Their minds combined sensory input with emotional memory, creating symbolic interpretations that gave the world coherence. In this context, spirituality became a tool for psychological adaptation. When the environment behaved unpredictably, early humans responded by attributing agency to it. This helped them manage fear, create a sense of predictability, and build internal narratives that allowed them to make emotional sense of events beyond their control. These interpretations were not irrational. They were part of the cognitive evolution that helped them navigate a world where survival depended on interpreting signals quickly and meaningfully. Natural forces became personified because their power demanded acknowledgement, and attributing intention to them provided emotional comfort and clarity. This growing perception of the environment as a living force also strengthened the bond between early humans and their surroundings. Caves, mountains, rivers, and ancient trees gained symbolic importance because they were associated with specific emotional experiences. A cave that provided shelter during a storm might be perceived as protective. A tree struck by lightning became a marker of raw power. A river that sustained the group through harsh seasons might come to embody abundance. These associations slowly evolved into the earliest forms of sacred places, long before humans had language to define them as such. Through this process, early humans began forming mental maps that blended geography, survival, emotion, and symbolism. Certain landscapes felt charged with significance, while others carried a sense of danger or taboo. These emotional landscapes became the foundation for spiritual constructs that would later influence myths, rituals, and belief systems. The natural world was their teacher, their enemy, their protector, and their mystery all at once, shaping their inner world in ways that left a permanent mark on the evolution of human spirituality. As the environment continued shaping early human perception, the evolution of the brain introduced an even more transformative layer to the origins of spirituality. With each stage of hominid development, neural structures responsible for memory, imagination, and emotional regulation became more complex. This expansion did not simply improve survival strategies. It created the cognitive conditions necessary for experiences that felt mystical, symbolic, or transcendent. When the brain became capable of integrating sensory input with abstract interpretation, the unseen world that early humans sensed began to take on more structured forms within their consciousness. The development of the prefrontal cortex played a critical role in this shift. It allowed early humans to reflect on past events, anticipate future outcomes, and construct narratives that extended beyond immediate experience. This new ability to imagine possibilities opened the door to perceiving forces that were not physically present. When a sound echoed through a cave, the brain could project meaning onto it. When a member of the group died, the mind could conceive of their presence lingering. When a sudden burst of light illuminated the sky, imagination filled the gaps left by the unknown. These cognitive leaps were subtle at first, but they fundamentally changed how humans interpreted existence. Another critical factor was the evolution of the limbic system, which amplified emotional depth. Moments of fear, awe, grief, and relief became not just reactions, but psychological markers tied to memory and meaning. A strong emotional event could trigger sensations that felt otherworldly, giving rise to experiences interpreted as signs, warnings, or connections to forces beyond the visible realm. As emotional memory strengthened, early humans began linking certain places, events, or natural phenomena with internal states that felt sacred or purposeful. The brain learned to treat these associations as significant, giving spiritual meaning a neurological foundation. Dreams also played a decisive role. With growing cognitive complexity, dreams became vivid, symbolic, and emotionally charged. For early humans, dreams were not mere mental activity, they were encounters. The boundary between waking life and the dream world was thin, allowing many early hominids to interpret dream imagery as real interactions with unseen entities or ancestral presences. These experiences reinforced the belief that existence extended beyond physical perception, providing one of the earliest psychological frameworks for spiritual thought. This combination of imagination, emotional depth, and dream symbolism created internal landscapes that were rich enough to support the first proto-spiritual experiences. Early humans could sense a presence in moments of silence, feel watched in vast open spaces, or interpret sudden insights as messages from beyond themselves. Their minds became capable of perceiving patterns, intentions, and connections that went far beyond immediate survival. It was within these expanding cognitive spaces that spirituality gained a foothold, transforming instinctive reactions into meaningful interpretations of the unseen world that shaped their understanding of life, death, and purpose. As the human mind gained the ability to imagine realities beyond what the senses could confirm, one perception became unavoidable: the awareness of death. This was a turning point in the development of spirituality. For millions of years, animals reacted to death only as a shift in the environment, a change in smell, a disappearance of movement. But early humans reacted differently. They paused. They observed. They lingered near the bodies of those who had shared their shelter, their hunts, their fears. Something inside them resisted the idea that a life so familiar could simply vanish. This emotional and cognitive tension gave rise to one of the earliest spiritual intuitions, that something existed beyond death. The first burials found in prehistoric sites reveal more than practicality. They reveal intention. Covering a body with sediment required effort. Arranging stones or placing tools near the deceased required thought. These gestures do not belong to creatures moving purely by instinct. They suggest an early belief that the dead still mattered, that their presence persisted in some invisible way. This emerging awareness reflects a profound psychological shift. Death was no longer perceived only as an ending, but as a transition into a realm that could not be seen but was deeply felt. This perception intensified as early humans watched natural cycles around them. Plants died and returned. The moon disappeared and then reappeared. Seasons shifted and repeated. These patterns taught them that life moved in rhythms rather than straight lines. When a member of the group died, the mind, already shaped by symbolic reasoning, connected these cycles to the fate of the individual. The idea that something might continue after the physical body decayed became a natural extension of the patterns they observed in the world. This interpretation did not require language or doctrine. It grew from the emotional experience of loss combined with the cognitive ability to imagine what might lie beyond. Fear of the unknown also played a significant role. Death brought silence, stillness, and the unsettling feeling of an invisible transition taking place. This fear pushed early humans to seek explanations that could protect them psychologically. If the dead continued in some form, then perhaps they could guide, warn, or influence the living. This belief strengthened group cohesion, giving meaning to grief and allowing communities to support one another through collective rituals. The acceptance of death as a doorway rather than a disappearance became one of the most powerful and enduring foundations of spirituality. As this perception deepened, early humans began forming ideas about unseen forces associated with death. Whether these forces were ancestors, spirits, or undefined presences, they represented an expanding internal map of reality. The boundary between the living and the unseen grew thinner in their imagination, shaping how they understood danger, protection, purpose, and destiny. This new awareness did not end with death. It reshaped how they interpreted every aspect of life. If this perspective made you reflect on how the awareness of death shaped early human spirituality, share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what part of this ancient perception resonates with you. As the awareness of death expanded the inner world of early humans, their social structures also began shaping the spiritual landscapes that would follow. Survival was never an individual endeavor. It depended on cooperation, shared vigilance, and emotional bonds within the group. This collective way of living naturally transformed spiritual perception into something communal. The fears, hopes, and interpretations that emerged within one individual quickly influenced the entire group, creating shared narratives that strengthened unity. Over time, these shared interpretations evolved into the earliest forms of collective belief, long before anything resembling an organized religion existed. When groups hunted together, mourned together, or faced hostile conditions, they relied not only on physical effort, but on shared meaning. A successful hunt might be attributed to a favorable unseen force, while a tragedy could be interpreted as a warning or imbalance. These interpretations created a psychological framework that gave the group a sense of control over experiences that were otherwise unpredictable. Through repeated patterns of shared interpretation, certain gestures and behaviors gained symbolic weight. A particular place might be avoided because previous events there felt ominous, or a certain action might be repeated because it was associated with safety or luck. These behaviors reflect the earliest seeds of collective ritual. Over time, specific individuals within the group developed stronger sensitivity to patterns, emotions, and symbolic associations. These individuals naturally became reference points for interpreting unusual events, or guiding the group's responses. They were not priests, shamans, or leaders in any organized sense, but their heightened perception gave them influence. Their ability to sense environmental shifts, predict animal movement, or understand emotional dynamics allowed them to articulate feelings the group could not yet express. Their insights shaped the shared worldview, reinforcing spiritual beliefs that emerged from collective experience. As groups grew larger and their territories expanded, the need for coherence became even more important. A shared spiritual understanding created emotional stability and reinforced cooperation. When a group believed that unseen forces watched over them, punished them, or protected them, it strengthened their sense of identity. Spiritual interpretation became a tool for social cohesion, guiding behavior, ensuring harmony, and preserving collective memory. Through this process, early communities developed traditions that were passed down from generation to generation, linking the past with the present through symbolic continuity. These early communal beliefs also influenced how groups approached their environment. Certain landscapes, caves, or natural formations became associated with shared experiences of fear, awe, or gratitude. These places eventually became gathering points where the group performed instinctive rituals, reinforcing the bond between community and unseen force. These early cult-like behaviors were not formal systems, but emotional and symbolic expressions of connection, belonging, and shared purpose. As these shared practices deepened, they laid the foundation for future religious structures. What began as simple reactions to the environment and to the mystery of death slowly transformed into collective spiritual systems that shaped human culture for thousands of generations to come. As collective beliefs grew stronger, something remarkable began to take shape deep within the human lineage, a spiritual heritage that existed long before any organized religion, scripture, or named deity. This ancient heritage was not designed or structured. It emerged from countless generations of experiences, emotions, interpretations, and symbolic behaviors accumulated over millions of years. Every fear, every moment of awe, every ritualistic gesture, and every instinctive response to the unseen contributed to this internal legacy. By the time Homo sapiens appeared, this spiritual foundation was already deeply embedded in the human psyche, influencing how early humans interpreted the world from the moment they opened their eyes. Traces of this heritage can be found in the behaviors of earlier hominids, showing that spirituality is far older than any myth recorded in writing. The earliest symbolic markings, the deliberate arrangement of bones, the use of pigments, and the creation of tools with aesthetic elements all reveal a mind that saw meaning beyond function. These actions, though simple, demonstrate a cognitive habit of assigning significance to objects and events. This tendency to treat the world as layered, symbolic, and emotionally charged became a defining trait passed through generations, shaping the evolution of spirituality before it had names or doctrines. As human cognition advanced, this inherited spiritual sensitivity expanded further. The ability to form complex memories, transmit stories, and interpret dreams gave future generations a richer internal landscape to build upon. Even without formal language, early humans communicated emotional and symbolic meaning through gestures, expressions, and shared experiences. These silent transmissions shaped a collective intuition about the unseen, allowing each generation to deepen and refine what the previous one had only begun to understand. This process created a continuous thread linking ancient instincts to emerging patterns of human thought. Evidence of early symbolic behavior also shows that spirituality evolved not through sudden revelations, but through constant reinforcement. A group that survived a difficult season might attribute its survival to a specific place or gesture. Those who learned from dreams or intuition might influence others through their insights. Over time, these repeated interpretations became traditions. The human mind, shaped by millions of years of environmental challenges, emotional reactions, and cognitive leaps, was naturally predisposed to see intention behind events. This predisposition was not a flaw. It was one of the mechanisms that allowed early humans to make sense of uncertainty and maintain emotional stability. As this heritage deepened, it formed the groundwork for myth-making long before myths existed. Early humans did not create stories to explain the world, they created them because their minds were already wired to find meaning. Their interpretations became narratives, their rituals became symbols, and their emotional understanding became the foundation of spiritual identity. These early narratives were not written or recited as doctrines, but lived through daily interactions with nature, the group, and the unseen. They represented an ancient continuity that carried forward across countless generations, ultimately giving rise to the religious traditions we know today. This invisible inheritance shaped not only how early humans survived, but how they thought, felt, and perceived the world. And even now, echoes of this ancient spiritual intuition still influence how we interpret meaning, purpose, and the mysteries that remain beyond our understanding. As this ancient spiritual foundation solidified across generations, it began shaping the psychology of early humans in ways that would define the future of human culture. The instinct to search for meaning, the emotional sensitivity to the unseen, and the tendency to associate natural events with invisible forces became part of the cognitive architecture carried into every new era. When Homo sapiens finally emerged with language, memory, and imagination far more advanced than any previous hominid, they did not start from zero. They inherited a mind already trained for spiritual interpretation. Their consciousness emerged in a world where the unseen was as real as the physical, and this shaped how they approached life, relationships, and the mysteries that surrounded them. The first myths of early Homo sapiens did not appear out of thin air. They were formed from layers of symbolic understanding accumulated across millennia. The way early humans interpreted dreams, navigated danger, and responded to emotional intensity already contained the seeds of spiritual thought. When they began painting caves with deliberate symbols and crafting objects with ritualistic purpose, they were not inventing spirituality, but expressing a legacy that had been developing long before they had the words to describe it. Their stories became clearer, their rituals more intentional, and their understanding of the unseen more structured. But the essence remained the same, a deep, intuitive relationship with forces that felt older than humanity itself. As communities expanded and human societies grew more complex, these early spiritual intuitions evolved into organized systems of belief. The stories passed through generations transformed into myths. The rituals performed in silence became traditions, and the symbolic places marked with emotional significance turned into sacred sites. Religion emerged as a refinement of ancient impulses rather than a replacement for them. The unseen continued to guide decisions, inspire creativity, and define collective identity. Even as cultures diverged and spiritual paths differed across continents, the psychological roots remained connected to the same early experiences of awe, fear, loss, and wonder that shaped the minds of our ancestors. What is truly striking is how this ancient heritage still influences us today. The instinct to search for meaning, the feeling of presence in moments of silence, the desire to connect with something beyond reason, and the emotional weight of mystery all trace back to the earliest humans who first sensed the world as layered and alive. Their inner world is still inside us, guiding how we interpret reality even in a modern context. Spirituality did not survive because it was taught. It survived because it was felt. It became interwoven with the evolution of consciousness itself, shaping how the human mind understands existence. And if you have reached this point, it means this journey through our deepest origins resonates with you in some way. Feel free to leave a comment saying something like, "This message was for me, so I know you stayed with me until the end." If this exploration added value to your understanding, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like, not as a routine gesture, but as a way to keep this space of curiosity and reflection alive. And if you want to continue expanding this conversation, there is a video right here that connects perfectly with what we explored today. Click on it and keep going. There is much more waiting for you on the other side.